Okay, so probably one of the most common techniques to start to evaluate a project's viability is to look at its net present value or discounted cash flow, a couple different terms out there that we can use interchangeably, which is to say, what is the value of the cash flow or the stream of cash inflows and outflows in today's dollars? So bring it all back to today for common comparison and figure out what that is. So it is a time value of money discounted process to give us a sense of the worth of the project, or what the benefit, or what the benefit, negative or positive, we're going to realize from the project and its costs. So it's also known as discounted cash flow, or just discounting, and it's probably, like I say, very widely used. One of the more common ones that you're going to see early on. And of course, we're going to grow on this and get more sophisticated, but it's going to be based on some of these early concepts. Now, one of the things that it does require, like all discounting methodologies, a percentage to use to reduce future cash flows to current dollars. As I mentioned in the last video, this is either, it can be called your discount rate, your hurdle rate, a cutoff rate, minimum annual rate of returns, number of different terms out there. For all intents and purposes, they all work the same. Normally, that value would be a policy of the company or the organization that knows what the opportunity cost is and what their projection is for inflation and everything else. They can build it all in. And so it would normally be provided as to what the minimum annual rate of returns would be to make a project acceptable for the investment for that company. So you're going to be working with your financial people to either get that or be given that rate for the assessment. Now, the advantages obviously includes the time value of money. We had a little bit of a discussion when we were talking about payback period. Doesn't matter a lot if it's really short. Certainly going to matter the longer projects go, or the longer time period the cash flows resulting from the project are going to extend. So if it's going to bring benefits for a long point in time, the time value of money is going to change the perceived value of some of those cash inflows later on in the benefits line. Whereas the time right now, the cash outlays are worth a lot in that context. So the other big advantage, so remember the big red flag on the payback period, right? Doesn't include any cash inflows or outflows beyond the payback period. And so this goes through the entire cash flow of the outlays and the benefits of the project, everything that it's going to bring in, everything that it's going to cost to produce it, and it's going to include all of those. And so there's no hidden opportunity or risk. It's all going to get rolled into this one value. So, in fundamental terms, the higher the net present value, the better. Now, the discount rate, or the MAR or hurdle rate that you're given, the higher that rate is, the lower your net present value is going to be because of its impact on later cash flows. So we want to have a high net present value, but it certainly is going to be related to this discount rate that you probably aren't going to control, and that's fine. So let's look at it. So here I've thrown up the formula for a future value, bringing it back to its net present value. And so it's that future value divided by 1 plus I to the n. And then if we sum them up for all future values in a timeline, we're going to get the net present value of the project itself. Yeah. So what I want to do is to have a look at this as a cash flow timeline. So I'm going to draw the timeline out. So in this case, we have a project. It's going to have initial investments in year 0 and year 1 of $10,000 and $12,000. And then it's going to have a return as an annuity, a consistent uniform series of $4,000 a year over its life of 9 years. Following its completion. And finally, at the end of the project, when it's no longer viable to keep going, there's still a salvage value of $3,000 in its last year that we're going to be able to realize. And the question then becomes, calculate its net present value. Is it worth it? Is there sufficient benefits to offset the costs of the project? And so let's build up the timeline. So I've drawn the timeline out here. I'm going to add, first off, my two cash outflows in year 0 and year 1. So $10,000 year 0, $12,000 in year 1. And then add my annuity inflow of $4,000 per year. And finally, my salvage value of $3,000 in the final year. So we're going to use this factor. It's the present worth factor. It just simplifies our calculation. It's also built into Excel. So if you're doing this up in a spreadsheet, as you will see, that's exactly what I did in this case, as I built it into a spreadsheet. It's really easy to use and get used to doing it. So the way the factor works, and normally I would refer to this factor as the present value of a future value given a rate and a time period. So P given F I N. And that is the formula. So if you look back at our original formula, the sum of F of T times this factor. So any future value F multiplied by this factor will give its present value. And so we can apply it that way, and it becomes very useful to us. So here's this little mini clip, a spreadsheet that I've used to solve this problem. So I've identified the interest rate as 8% in this case. And over the timeline, so I have 0 to 10, and my non-discounted cash flows shown out, $10,000 or minus 10,000, minus 12,000, series of $4,000 going down here to year 9, and then finally in year 10, that 4,000 goes up to $7,000 because of the $3,000 salvage rate. And what I would need to do then is to figure out what the present value of each of those payments are, and so I can do that by multiplying it by the present worth factor. And so depending on what N is, because N is the year that the payment occurs in, it's going to change the discounting. Of course, the rate's not going to change. It's going to be 8% all the way through. You can look these up in tables, or as I mentioned, these formulas are built into Excel as well, or you can build them in as custom functions. I've got a great video on how to do custom functions in Excel if you ever want to see it. And so that's what we've done here in the third column, is we have each of those payments discounted for where they are in the timeline. And of course, then if we sum them up or run a running total, we can do a running total down here in column 4, and we see we get to positive cash flow, positive discounted cash flow in, where are we, year 9, whereas we get to positive not discounted cash flow in year 7. So this value then, this sum, is the net present value. The higher that number, the better it is for us. Certainly if it's below 0, it would be considered non-viable. If it's above 0, it's a viable project, but it's not paying off a lot necessarily. And so we're looking for this number to be as big as possible. And just to remember back from our present value, so our payback period, I'll identify them here just so that we grow on that lesson from before. So we have a payback period of 7 years, not discounted, whereas we have a payback period of 9 years if we use discounted cash flows down here. And so that's really net present value in a sum. There are a whole... That really is net present values. There's a lot of other ways you can use to calculate it, as in, different factors, and be more sophisticated, less sophisticated. But if you have a cash flow and you're using the present worth factor, you can calculate it. You can build it in a spreadsheet. It's going to take you a couple minutes, not particularly hard to do. And if done up in this way, you can also get your payback period. So now you've got a couple different tools. You can talk not just about the payback period, discounted or otherwise, but you can also talk about the net present value, which is now not just 0 or positive or negative or positive, but what is the actual net present value to the project as a whole. So that's it for net present value, and we'll be back shortly to discuss the internal rate of return.